Let's start the second part of the day. And now we are going to switch gears a little bit. So as technologies, it's always nice to see how the world is evolving, what kind of new challenges, going to cloud, how to write new applications, how to do it, porting them, understanding the multiple strategies. But it's always easy to fall into how the next great technology is going to change the world. But in reality, transformations are not driven just by technologies or products or things like that. So it takes like driving an organization in terms of how to put like a business need into production and how to move all the people, all the processes, how to create new services, how to make it happen essentially. So now in this second part of the talk, we are going to switch gears to, instead of talking just about technology or products, what we are going to do is invite Ken Owens into the stage and see how he did or he's doing in order to transform a specific industry into a new way of doing things. So Ken, thanks for being here with us. He's been doing these transformations along his career, at least that I know him in 2 or 3 places with like moving to clouds, moving to cloud natives, moving things. So lots of experience, lots of scars. So thank you for being here with us.
So I always have the, when I look at the agenda of like what the order of the presentation, I'm always like disappointed when I'm right after lunch. But thankfully you had like all this cake out here, so now you got full of energy. So now I'm kind of excited about this because there's been cake. So just to give you a little bit of idea of, if this thing will work, of who I am. It's not working, so I'll try this other one. All right, there we go. Okay, so just so you know a little bit about me, I've been at Mastercard for a little bit over a year now. They asked me to, come in and help them with this transformation they're making towards kind of digital architectures, digital currency, moving their applications towards cloud native. Didn't quite tell me how painful it was going to be, but it's still a lot of fun, a lot of challenges that are going to keep me interested for a while. Before that, I spent some time at Cisco doing cloud. Before that, I was at Savvis and CenturyLink doing cloud and security technologies and different innovations around security. I'm also a founding member of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which you saw one of our slides earlier up there with the landscape. That was not my idea, way too much complications and confusion on that landscape, but I'm trying to fix that in a different working group I'm in there with the reference architecture. But I'm also on the I was one of the voted members in for a 3-year term for the TOC, so I'm kind of helping bring projects, spend a lot of time with Kubernetes and open tracing and a lot of other great projects that we brought into the CNCF, so I've been help shepherd them through. When I'm not doing this, which seems like I don't have much time not to do this type of work, but when I'm not working, which isn't much time, I'm spending my time out at like camps with the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts. I have 2 Eagle Scouts. I'm venturing, one of my girls is venturing, she's trying to go for Summit in the next year. Now that Boy Scouts allows girls in, she's thinking about going to get her Eagle Scout before she turns 18. And so I might have one of the first girl Eagle Scouts as well in my family, which would be kind of fun. Do a lot of science and technology stuff with them with STEM. Do a lot of coding on my own. Love to code and hack things and break things whenever I can, except my wife's stuff, because she doesn't want me playing with her stuff at all. And when I'm not doing that, I like to take the kids out to shoot and hunt and have that kind of fun as well on the farm. So when I think about, what I was asked to speak to you guys about, the idea of these Lego bricks came to mind, right? And my kids love Legos. I'm sure you guys have kids who love Legos. I love Legos still. But there's a lot of complexity when you're trying to transform a large organization. We've talked a little bit about that, and you had some great questions in the audience about how do you transform some type of an environment that is so large and so monolithic and has been around for, like in Mastercard's case, 30-something years doing transactions at very high speeds and very low latency. How do you do that in a new way and do it in a way that's as reliable, as secure, and as fast? There's a lot of complexity in trying to make very complex systems that were designed to do state-of-the-art things transformed. There's also a lot of commodity in minds of enterprises. They want to try to save costs, cut back on operational expenses, and they think they can do that by just go buy the cheapest, lowest cost solution, and Mastercard has probably 50 of the best tools in the industry, and we do like 1% of what that tool can do for all of those 50 things we bought them for, right? And so how do you sort of balance that idea of commodity and purpose-built and innovation, right? There's got to be kind of a trade-off that's needed there. The other thing that is probably the most important part, and if you hear nothing else this afternoon from me, it's the culture change that's required, right? You can't just walk into a 30-year-old company and say, okay, all of you guys are going to now move away from your monolithic application development, and you're going to do things with microservices and containers, and go now, just start. They get a bunch of like weird looks at you. They ask you like who you are, where you came from, like who you think you can tell them what they're doing type of like discussions. So culture is really important to think about. And probably the most important thing I brought to Mastercard while I've been there is this idea of you don't have to make this big transformation overnight. You want to basically take like baby steps, deliver something, and then iterate on there, because this concept of, you know, we deploy something and then we like care and feed that for 5 years and we move to the next technology, and we care and feed that for 5 years and we move to the next technology, is really not existing anymore in today's world. So it's really more of a matter of you're never done, you're never like finished, you're just continuously innovating and continuously iterating on what you're doing and trying to get better and faster as you go, right? And so this concept of trying to deliver and iterate quickly is important. I kind of mentioned this earlier, but part of that culture is finding the individuals within that culture that can really help be those change agents for your organization. If you find some change agents and you get them to kind of work with you to help change the organization, it's a lot faster than just one person coming in from the outside saying, everyone go this way, right? And you also need people who are going to help drive that, get involved and lead that change, not just sit on the sidelines and talk about all the things that are wrong. And then probably most important is focus. Like get set for what you want to get accomplished, make a clear objective, get the leadership of the organization behind that objective, and then focus relentlessly on getting that objective completed. So I won't go through all of these. We've heard about quite a few of these today. There's a few things in here that I'll touch on because they are, I think, unique to what you haven't heard yet today. And I think one of them is that it's really around how you design your services, not microservices, for instance, but whatever your objective is for your business is a service. And those services consist of other services. And so how you think about those services as a consumable set of services that can be reached by other application platforms, by other internal systems, or by your customers is all about how you design your APIs, how you design the way that services will interact with other services. And there's an art to that. It's not a science, right? It takes a lot of well thought out planning to understand how that service is going to change over time. Because I can tell you from experience, a lot of application teams will write an API and they'll say, this is my API. And then a year later they go, oh, I didn't like that API, so I changed it to this new API. And now we have 10,000 transactions falling on the floor because no one thought about telling the customers that, hey, we just changed your API that you use every day when you do your transactions. So you don't want to do that. So thankfully we caught that in dev, so it didn't make it to stage, but the repercussions of that could have been pretty big. And the last thing is a lot of what I'm doing right now at Mastercard is focusing on changing this concept of CI/CD being in one set of like processes and change control rules to a CI process that allows developers to really focus on their code, and a CD process that's really more around the whole GitOps methodology around deploying quickly and deploying in multiple locations. So they're not too focused on where their code's going to run as much as just making their code integrate, tested, and secured. So a little bit about what we're doing at Mastercard. Most of you guys probably have heard of us. We're a small little credit card transaction processing company. Some of the things that I like to describe about us is that we are very fast. We are one of the fastest processing networks in the world. Our average latency is 160 milliseconds, which when you think about what we talked about earlier with blockchain, it's pretty fast. We have probably the most secure network. Some other credit card companies actually buy our fraud services and some of our security services because they are really, really state-of-the-art security. And that's in everything we do. security is built in. It's not bolted on at the end. It's not, hey, could we make this more secure? Security is like a first-class citizen at Mastercard, which, as you see, as I go through the presentation, you'll see why I'm bringing that up. Performance is sort of a joke I have at Mastercard because I've been in a lot of really important companies that have performance as their top thing, right? But if you think about it, when you're sitting there at the terminal and you're putting your credit card in something, right, you don't want to wait 10 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 seconds for that response to come back, right? And you don't want, if there's some kind of a fraud event happening with your information, you don't want to find out about it a month later or 2 months later when a credit report comes back and says, hey, somebody has your card, right? Or has your personal information. So at Mastercard, they take performance to like a whole different level across multiple different accesses, which makes it very complicated because you can always optimize, as you guys know from network, you can always optimize along a couple of dimensions, but trying to optimize along all dimensions is almost impossible, but that's sort of the processing that we're trying to get done. And we have a lot of innovations going on. We have labs groups across the US, Europe, and Asia that are always looking at, what are the newest technologies, how can we use the technologies that would benefit Mastercard and our customers and our partners the best. And so as you kind of think about like what Mastercard is trying to do and the type of security and reliability that we're looking for, over the last, 9 months now, we've been looking at service mesh technology. Not so much to solve like every problem because you're not solving every problem with the technology, but we look at it from the standpoint of we have a lot of legacy systems and a lot of security, mostly around the security protocols that we're using and the security requirements that we have, that you can't just take these hardware keys and microservice them and put them out in the network and say, everybody manage your keys separately, right? We have a pretty strong requirement around the way we manage keys. And so something like a service mesh helps us extend cloud-native methodologies to the app teams while still keeping the level of security and performance and reliability that we have at Mastercard in those services that those applications rely on and that our customers rely on still in place. And so I kind of put together a little bit of information about service mesh. It's a little bit different than my friend at Google mentioned, but it's really, to me, it's like a configurable layer, almost like a control plane that we have a little bit more control over at runtime to do more interesting use cases at Mastercard. A service mesh really focuses on those different services I mentioned earlier and how you can make them more reliable, make them faster, make them more secure. The other thing we've looked at is as I work with the application teams to help them decompose their apps, these different services, they get very coupled to something, right? They I need this application to talk to this service and this service and this service, and it has to talk to them in this order. And so with the service mesh, we're able to sort of tell them, well, the way you do that today doesn't translate well into this new architecture. So what we have to do is build a little bit of a proxy here that will allow that service to communicate through this channel to this other service. And what your application is going to do is just bind to that service now instead of have to create a ticket and have to configure that service to talk to you. You just have to pass us these 3 bits of information and we'll configure it on the fly and give you access to it immediately. Which they think is really cool because it works every time for them and they don't have to wait weeks to get connectivity in place. It's also very complicated in that now we have to look at how do we secure these services and how do we ensure that these services that we're talking to are really the services we meant for them to be, right? They're not just some service thrown up in the middle of the network that is out in the internet and we just connected to it for our customer and made all of our transactions exposed. The other thing about this that's important is, and you've heard of this before, but I can't describe just how important things like discoverability, being able to route, kind of do routing within services and between services, being able to authenticate the services and the users, and the next level of authentication to that service that is trying to get access to. How do you kind of pass those authentications through? And those are things that we've solved or in the process of solving and open sourcing back that to the Istio community at Mastercard. I did mention Istio. Here's kind of the current leader there. But what we like about it is not so much that it's Istio, it's that we're able to accomplish all of these business objectives that we've had to try to accomplish. And it runs in a legacy environment, which is very VMware based. It runs in a Google Cloud environment that we're testing, and it runs in Azure that we're testing, and it runs in AWS that we're testing in. So it kind of gives us that hybrid methodology between these different type of platforms. And that's not to say that we are using it to kind of solve multi-cloud problems, because to me, multi-cloud is just it's just a deployment. Like I mentioned before, we can deploy anywhere we want to deploy our code, but the process and the configurations around that and the security of the services we're deploying in those environments is really the key that we focused on, not the cloud. So I talked a little about these different concepts, and I know you heard about them earlier already, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but the key for this, as I kind of mentioned earlier, is the traffic management piece from a performance and from a fast reliability standpoint. The security piece and the identity components, some of the policies that we're defining and the way that we're managing policy across our entire environment through a single set of APIs is really unique and something that we haven't published yet, but I think in the next few months you might see some things about that in the open source community that we're publishing. And then the last thing here that's really important for us was observability. Like I mentioned kind of earlier, we've been able to sort of gain a lot of interesting insights in our applications and their behavior, and also kind of detecting bad events or fraud events or any kind of vulnerabilities in the systems that we're running in the same way that you'd expect when you're able to kind of see that data in real time and make real quick analysis of what's going on with that data. And so some of the data scientists that we have at Mastercard have done some really interesting work around this, and there's probably some papers that they'll be coming out with at some point this year to talk about how when you kind of see events happening in the network and how you can correlate that back to a transaction, and you can correlate that to a merchant that's been compromised, you're able to sort of protect every user that's going to that merchant site. Whereas today we detect card by card fraud, but with this type of technology, we're able to sort of detect an entire site has been compromised, and we can protect every card user at that site from that point on. And so architecture, again, was brought up earlier, but the point of this is that it's a very simple architecture. We've put our control plane sort of where we put a lot of our control components within our applications for cloud deployments. The application teams don't have to worry about any of these components. Everything is sort of built in a declarative format, so when they write their application, they have a set of binds they have to bind to from like certificates. They have to bind to some of the security aspects that we have that are like underneath the covers for how we secure our applications. And then we leverage the natural capabilities of Envoy to kind of route and load balance those services across different deployments, and we can scale up each individual application services independently of the other services that you depend on. And so I guess kind of to summarize, focus on that API design and spend a lot of time there. Remember that it's like people and process mostly, right? It's not really the technology. I love technology. I spend most of my time looking at technology, testing it, playing around with it, figuring out how I can make better use of it. But at the end of the day, I can make any technology work, as you guys can, right? It's really how do you get your people and the processes that you built around your organization aligned in a way that you can actually execute on these principles and on these capabilities at a much faster pace than you can today. And then the last thing is, open source, as like I mentioned a couple of times, it's really important to this effort, and Mastercard is getting more involved in contributing code upstream. Just definitely want to just throw it out there. I would love to have more and more involvement from the community in this and some of the security things we're doing. If you're interested in network and security, I know they're kind of like oxymorons, but they're really important, as you know. So the more you can involve with that, we'd love to have your involvement in that. So thank you very much.
Any question? No?
So I don't have so much of a question as just a comment on the elements of transformation. I've been through several with VARs looking to become MSPs specifically, and I've seen the most success in that transformational effort when you kind of pull out a like-minded group of individuals and begin to formulate a plan from a technology and process, view of the world, kind of align on that, and then reinsert it back into the organization. That's where it's really moved pretty seamlessly to the end goal, as opposed to trying to move an entire business with one big push.
Definitely.
Hi, Ken. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
We've talked some here about the decoupling of services from infrastructure, especially as a way of making these more portable and making them more adaptable to other people. In your practice, is there a subset or a chunk of Mastercard services that are already so decoupled from their infrastructure and from the underlying service mesh that Mastercard could effectively share them in some type of an open source fabric concept with the general community, and other folks in their respective enterprises can simply absorb them in, bind to those services, and have efficiency happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's the first one you're going to see is something we call Synapse internally. But the idea of Synapse is it's really that security. It's that security framework that I mentioned earlier that kind of gives us policy management and enforcement at a very granular level between services. And the interesting thing about this is you kind of mentioned the decoupling, and I kind of mentioned virtual machines early on because 99% of my applications are in a traditional data center, and they're not going to go cloud native anytime soon. Not because I don't want them to, but because I think we would probably go bankrupt and have a bunch of outages and failures and fraud and all kinds of bad things happen, right? Which is just not a good business model, really. So, but those applications have the exact same benefit, and so as they refactor their application, they don't have to really think about what we're doing in the service mesh because it's already installed in their environment as well, and they're using it to kind of broker services internally that used to be much harder for them to get access to. And so even the legacy applications are getting the benefit from this new technology because they're able to do things much faster, much reliable, much more quickly without going out into an environment where the application has to be rewritten because it's a huge monolith that if we did break it apart, it would not be very easy to break apart and it would cause lots of problems probably. So we tried to break some of those monoliths apart, but it's they call it brownfield for a reason. That's all I'll say.
All right. I know you've got this.
That's VMware power right there. So Kent, we've heard, I think, a consistent theme today. It's a networking conference. Most of us sit inside of organizations where network is a silo. This seems like a network layer responsibility, but from a silo perspective, this concept of service net mesh and creating a centralized API clearinghouse, whether we're doing it through API gateways, service mesh proper like Istio or whatever, where practically does this responsibility sit inside of the organization?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I can't speak for every enterprise, but I know a lot of the enterprises I've worked with over the last several years and talked to, the network team, I have some of the network team on my team, but most of them are doing the traditional networking that you want them to do, right? They keep the lights on, they keep the network at the speeds that it needs to be at, and they don't really have time to take their eyes off of the prize and come look at new technology, right? So you kind of want to leave those guys where they're at. We kind of built something called a platform team, and that platform team, to somebody, I can't remember who brought it up earlier, is really a cross-discipline, cross-function team that has network, storage, guys that were traditional, like your VMware admins are on that team. We have Linux admins, and we have Windows admins on that team. And their job wasn't to come over and take their discipline and just apply that discipline. Their job was to come over in this platform team and think about the entire platform as a service and think about how do we manage this platform as a service. So as we build these APIs, we own those APIs. We own the lifecycle of those APIs. We own these networking components at that service mesh layer to the point where we're responsible for monitoring them, we're responsible for maintaining them. And this platform team is a DevOps team, meaning that we write the code and we support our code. We don't pass the code over to operations and say, good luck. And so it's built and designed to really be self-contained, self-reliant. But having said that, there are interfaces into the network. There are interfaces into our operations tooling. There are interfaces into some of the services that the security team enforces that we use, right? And those interface boundaries are very complicated to work through. What I just said sounds like, oh, great, I'll just go build a platform team and all my problems are solved. No, you have different problems now because you have to interface to all these other teams that look at you as the new cool kids on the block. They get all the money and get all the credit, and they have to keep the lights on, and they don't like you very much for that. And so what I've done is really just like I take them out for pizza and beer a lot. I try to become friends with these guys because they have great intelligence. They got our company to where it is today, and you all have them in your enterprises, right? They're the guys that, you have to thank for how you got to where you got to today, and you don't want to just kick them out and say, hey, thank you for your service, goodbye, right? So they still have a lot of value, and in some cases, I've actually had a few of them come and join the platform team a year later and say, hey, you know what, you were right when you were talking about these things, and I was just too stubborn to admit it, but now I can see this, and I want to be part of this effort, and you do win a few of them over. Maybe. I don't know. Still, this. Ask me next year.
Everybody want to see how far I can throw? Come on.
All right, well, thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken.